Hi friends, welcome to UNS classes. We are again back with one previous year question. Today the question is from plant reproduction and the question is the term used for transfer of pollen grains from anther to one plant to stigma of a different plant which during pollination brings genetically different types of pollen grains to stigma is Clistogamy, Xenogamy, Heterostylis and Cosmogamous. So as usual, our routine, we will learn little about each option and we'll come to the answer. So the first option is Clistogamy. So what is Clistogamy? Clistogamy is nothing but what we call it as closed marriage. What do you mean by closed marriage? Closed marriage is something like an self-pollination. Here the flower is mostly closed, so they don't need any external pollinator. So think of a flower which is closed like this and they have their stigma and anther which contains the pollen grains, right? These pollen grains from the same flower will pollinate the stigma and get fertilized. So this is called closed marriage or Clistogamy. The examples are peanuts, peas, pansies, even drosera, which is an insectivorous plant, is also an example of Clistogamy. So what's opposite to Clistogamy or closed marriage is open marriage, which is called Cosmogamous, which is one of our options, right? So what is Cosmogamous? Cosmogamous is open marriage. So what do you mean by open marriage? In Cosmogamous, the thing is that they have very prominent flowers and they have very exposed reproductive part of the flower. Exposed in the sense, the stigma and the anthers are quite exposed. They are not in a closed flower. The flower will be somewhat like this. They have a prominent flower which attracts the pollinators. So they have cross pollination, but sometimes they do self pollination. So they need biotic and abiotic pollinators also. So our question was which bring genetically different pollen grains from different flowers. There is a chances here that they get pollens from different flower to this stigma and there is chances that they also undergo self-pollination. So let's go through other options and find out which one is the most correct one. So the next option was, so before going to next option, let's find out the difference between Cosmogamous flowers and Clistogamous flowers. We know that Clistogamous flowers are normally, they are closed flowers, right? So their anther and stigma won't be exposed. So in Cosmogamous, open flower exposing anthers and stigma. Here the flower is closed and the stigma and anthers are never exposed. And the second one was may undergo self or cross pollination, right? May undergo self or cross pollination, but here they undergo only self pollination. And the next option is pollinating agents are required. We told that we need biotic and they may need biotic or abiotic pollinators. What do you mean by biotic and abiotic? Biotic means insects, abiotic means wind, water, something like that. So they need a pollinating agent. Here there is no external pollinating agent is needed, right? Because they are closed and they undergo self-pollination. And the last one is flowers are often prominent, right? Here the flowers should be prominent so that they can attract biotic pollinators. Here the flowers are not much distinguishable because the flowers become prominent or colorful to attract pollinators. Here they don't need any external pollinators, so the flowers won't be much prominent or colorful. So we can go to the next option. The next option was Xenogamy. So what's Xenogamy? Xeno means stranger. Gamus means marriage. So what is it all about? It is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of different plants. And see what's written here. Only type of cross pollination which bring genetically different type of pollen grains to the stigma. This was our question, right? Which form of pollination brings genetically different types of pollen grains to stigma? And the correct answer will be Xenogamy, because it never undergoes self-pollination, they always undergo cross-pollination. And these kind of flowers have their own mechanism to prevent self-pollination. The methods are Heterogamy. In Heterogamy, what they do is they have a mechanical barrier between their stigma and the anther, so that the pollen grains from the anther never comes and sits on the stigma. So they have a mechanical barrier, and that method is called Heterogamy. Second one is Dichogamy. In Dichogamy is that they mature their stigma and pollen at different time intervals. So when the anther is matured, the stigma won't be mature to receive that anther. And when the stigma is mature, the anther won't be mature to pollinate the stigma. So flowers mature at different times to create self-incompatibility. And third method is male sterility. That means the anther can't pollinate its own stigma. Next one is dioecium. Dioecium is nothing but in a plant, the plant will either have male flower and the plant, or will have only the female flower. That is, male and female flowers will be in different plants. That's called dioecious plants. They are not monoecious, they are dioecious plants. See, cross-pollination always occur when the plants are unisexual and dioecious. That is, male and female flowers occur on separate plants, right? And the last method is Heterostylis. That is, the flower of same plant have different length of stamen and anther, that the plant will create stigma and stamen in a way that they are different in length and the pollen never reaches to the stigma. These are some of the mechanisms in xenogamy that prevents the flower from self-pollination, and this is the only method that can bring genetically different pollen grains to the flower. And the last option was Xenogamy. What is Xenogamy? Xenogamy is a type of self-pollination, or we can say that it's a type of cross-pollination, but ultimately there won't be no genetical difference because the pollen grains from a flower goes to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Okay, the pollen grain from a flower goes to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. So in total, there won't be no genetical difference. So it is also a type of autogamy. Okay, so to get it more clear, we can refer through this picture. If you see this picture, see, the anther from the same flower goes to the stigma. This is called autogamy. Now, here see, the anther from the flower goes to the stigma of flower of another plant. See what it will be called. It is called xenogamy or cross-pollination. Like, see, the anther from a flower goes to another flower of a different plant. So it's xenogamy or cross-pollination. But in case of Xenogamy, you see, the anther from a flower goes to another flower, but both the flowers are on the same plant. So it may look like cross-pollination, but if we see the genetic variation, there will be no genetic variation because both the flowers are on the same plant. So let's go back to the question. Here, the question was, which is the method that brings the genetic variation? Right. See, it was like, during pollination brings genetically different pollen grains to stigma. And now the answer is quite obvious, right? The answer is xenogamy. Right? Hope you got the concept. Happy learning.